Here's to your garden, here's to your kids. I heard you were in the neighborhood. I've been a long time on the skids. And baby, I'm beside you. You run from the river when it long ran over you.
19th of September 1981. Dear Owner and Ralph, we have just come back from seeing Ross and Joe and their friend off in Joshua on the start of their journey and thought you might like to hear all about it. Maybe send this letter to Esther, Joe's mother. I got up at 6:25 this morning to bake 2 loaves of wholemeal bread, and with a pot of jam and a copy of my book, we set off for the marina. There were quite a few friends to see them off, and we all stood and chatted for a while. I gave Joe the bread and jam and Ross the book, and they seemed very pleased. At approximately 10:30, the crew went aboard, started the motor, asked for the forward mooring line to be let go, and amid a flurry of coloured streamers thrown to them from every direction, they slowly edged away from the wharf. All the while, Norm was sighing all the time. If only I was 20 years younger, I'd be there with them, he kept saying. They couldn't have had a better day for their departure, though. The sea was quite calm, but there was a nice stiff sailing breeze. And so they were off, and that is how their great adventure began.
After several years of cruising, living and working in the Pacific Islands, Ross and Joe sailed Joshua home to Opua in the Bay of Islands, New Zealand. On board was their 5-month-old baby daughter Emma, who'd been born during their time in Noumea, New Caledonia. Once back on land, they sold the boat and set up a marine business and adapted once again to life ashore. They settled quickly into the local community, and their son Nick was born a short time later. Life was good in the bay, but Ross and Joe were always ready for a new challenge. They became involved in successive America's Cup challenges, the last of which was the 32nd America's Cup Challenge in Valencia. There, they bought a new yacht. They called it Sojourn, and they set sail to finally realize their dream of cruising under sail once more. 29 years later, after 4 years of sailing, they're back in the Pacific. They're on the final leg of their return voyage back to New Zealand. Once again, they're sailing from Noumea to Opua on their long way home. They're about to make the last 1,000-mile passage back to where it all began. The cruising lifestyle of long offshore passages followed by the excitement of landfall in faraway places does, after time, start to develop its own special sense of rhythm. After the thrill and sometimes relief of a safe passage, there's a time of rest and a time of recovery and relaxation. It's a quiet afternoon in Noumea, and Sojourn sits gently tugging at her mooring lines as she moves in the light, warm trade wind blowing across the marina. As a possible departure date gets closer, the mood changes to one of preparation of the yacht for the next passage, and the relaxation starts to be replaced by work. There are last-minute gifts and souvenirs to buy for family and friends. Local markets provide good shopping for many of the stores and fresh produce. Joe chooses carefully for freshness as she starts the job of provisioning the boat for the long voyage ahead. Joe will pre-prepare a number of meals that can be frozen and quickly reheated for times when it's too rough to cook. The storing of the provisions and the stowing of the boat ready for sea is a long and seemingly thankless task. It takes time to get things shipshape for the unknown conditions that may lie ahead. The cruising lifestyle has often been described as fixing things in exotic places. There's always something to be repaired or checked. Ross replaces a galley pump that's been leaking fresh water into the bilge. It's a problem they can ill afford once at sea. He inspects the main bilge pump and the tightness of its connections. This is the pump of last resort. It's a vital item of equipment that could buy them valuable time after a collision at sea by enabling the boat to stay afloat long enough for a better repair to be made. It's a dramatic reminder of the ever-present risks of sailing offshore. Although Sojourn is a fast boat under sail, Ross is still prepared to motor should her speed fall due to lack of wind. This part of the Southern Pacific is no place to sit and wait for the weather. They need to make good time. Ross knows that the faster they can go and the least time they will spend out there, the better. A faster trip means less exposure to the elements and the dangers of high seas. Sojourn will carry enough fuel in her tanks and an extra jerry cans lashed on board to give her the range to motor when she needs to. They've moved from the dock and anchor in a quiet bay nearby as they make final preparations for the voyage. Ross has started early and is checking Sojourn's rigging from top to bottom. It's a task he's performed many times before, a task that's always carried out just before a difficult passage. He needs to meticulously inspect the rig for any signs of wear or fatigue that could lead to a breakage. Failure to spot these telltale signs could have catastrophic results at sea when the rig is under tremendous load and heavy weather. Any fitting showing any sign of wear will be replaced. He tapes lines at their point of wear. Chafing is the ever-present danger on a boat sailing 24 hours a day for sometimes weeks at a time. Ross begins to study and analyse the stream of weather data that he is receiving daily onto the boat. He's looking for a pattern in the weather that signals a good time to make their departure. The ocean between New Caledonia and New Zealand is renowned for dangerous and unpredictable changes in the weather, particularly at this time of the year. Violent and prolonged storms at sea can quickly exhaust a short-handed crew like Ross and Joe. A sea anchor can be used to slow the boat and hold its bow to windward in heavy weather, while its exhausted crew can rest below and recover while a storm rages outside. It has to be installed with great precision so that it can be easily deployed at what is always a time of great danger and stress. Setting a sea anchor ready on the bow for this final leg shows Ross's thoroughness and preparation. He's hoping for the best, but always planning for the worst. With Sojourn ready for sea, but still waiting for favourable weather, Ross and Joe enjoy some time out ashore on a nearby island. They're a very experienced team and have prepared for many passages over the last 4 years. Now, they walk, talk, and relax. They can only really guess as to what will lie ahead. But whatever that will be, they know that they have prepared well. Finally, the day arrives, and in the early golden light of a beautifully still Noumea morning, with Joe on the wheel, Ross hoists the mainsail as they prepare to leave the harbour. They have a good breeze and will make good time as they sail out across the lagoon and head for the pass and the outer reef at Armady Light. This will be the last land they see until they reach New Zealand in about a week's time. Sojourn and her crew find their sea legs as she eagerly pushes south into the gentle swell. By sunset on the first day, the sea state has started to change. No longer sheltered by land or reef, the South Pacific Ocean's mood darkens as night approaches. It has been a hard night. The ocean south of New Caledonia has long been known to produce some large seas. Last night was no exception. In the blue light of dawn, The heavy wind and the high seas have left behind a jumbled sea state, which is now slowly falling as they get into the rhythm of a new day. Sojourn pushes forward into the dawn as the first sun starts to warm the day. Last night, a very large swell and opposing wind had combined to produce the largest seas Ross and Joe have experienced on the whole trip so far. They're grateful that it's now behind them. It's now a beautiful trade wind sailing day, and as predicted, the wind starts to back around. While Ross has these conditions, he will set the boat to run with the wind under a mainsail in a poled-out genoa. It's an opportunity to get some good miles under Sojourn's keel. With Sojourn nicely balanced and sailing well on her own, Ross and Joe have some time to relax in the comfortable conditions.
We were always going to do it again. For me, doing it the first time was just a dream that I had from being a young kid, 16 or 17. It was one thing in life that I just knew that I was going to do, was going to go and cross an ocean in a boat.
It was Ross's dream. I've followed on with it because I'd never really been a sailor at all, but loved change and adventure, loved the lifestyle, and when someone says do something, I'll think for a second and think, okay, do that, and think of the consequences as they go along and deal with them. Probably I've always been taught by my mum to get on with it, just do it.
It was never a question of, why we were going to do it, or it was only a question of when. And in our mind, we were going to wait until the children had both got through their education, whatever that might be, and we could go and cruise again. But fortunately for us, all the timing was right, so we decided to buy the boat and the Med and sail home.
When Ross is not sailing, he's a keen sports fisherman. But fishing at sea under sail at 6 to 7 knots is no sport. There's no rod and reel. It's simply food gathering, and it's brutal and unattractive. A heavy bungee is fastened to strong nylon cordage. The lure attached by heavy-duty nylon monofilament and steel trace. Whatever takes the lure isn't going to get free. The bungee serves to absorb the shock of the struggle and exhaust the fish until it dies, so that it can be safely brought to the back of the moving boat. A small yacht cockpit racing across the waves is no place to have to deal with a wild, struggling fish caught on a treble hook. 2 large mahi-mahi or dolphin fish had taken the lure and hooked up. As Ross watches, the fish struggle against the bungee, and to his amazement, a shark appears and attacks first one fish and then the other. One fish is eaten whole along with the lure, and the load on the rig snaps the 200-kilogram monofilament line. Ross starts to retrieve the lure back to the boat, and as he starts to retrieve it, he notices another large mahi-mahi appear and chase it. He decides to throw the lure back out and see if he can hook and keep a mahi-mahi after all. The fish takes the lure and is hooked. The waiting shark returns and chases the hapless fish as Ross races to get it to the boat before the shark can claim another victim. The fish is quickly brought to the back of the boat, where Joe expertly assists Ross by pouring a high-proof white spirit into its gills to quickly and humanely kill it. At sea under sail, even the fishing is a team effort, and each have their roles.
Oh, wow, well done!
Never had to compete with a shark before. How's that? How's that? She's a beauty.
It's a fine fish they've caught, and it will feed them for several days. With a calm sea and a warm evening, Ross and Joe celebrate their successful catch with a quiet drink as they talk and watch the sunset. Joe cooks the day's catch while harnessed against the constant motion of the boat as Sojourn presses on into the dusk. They set a 3-hour watch system through every single night at sea. The first watch is from 8 o'clock at night until 11. They will then wake the other at 11, who will be on watch until 2 in the morning.
Well, I do get a bit grumpy. We get grumpy with each other, but I just know that there's an end to it, and we just push through. I think my worst nightmare would be Ross falling over in the night time, waking up and you not being there. but I sort of block that in my mind because I know it can't happen because he's clipped on. And that sounds a bit simple, but that's the way I deal with it. I don't actually do what-ifs.
It's a relentless nightly ritual of continuously broken sleep for as long as the passage lasts.
My worst nightmare at sea is that something really serious happened to me and Jo was left on her own. That would be my worst nightmare. So I'm always careful with myself at sea. I'm really careful with the boat at sea, and I'm ultra cautious to protect me, because if I go, it would be really, really difficult for Jo.
After a while, to relieve the boredom of a long ocean passage, even the most mundane chores at sea provide a welcome change to the daily routine. Doing the laundry at sea requires some initiative, but there's always plenty of line space, and it does dry very quickly. Having rested, and with any necessary tasks completed, there are often long hours to spend, either alone with your thoughts or perhaps with a book.
When we're on a long passage, Ross, I know, is enjoying the ride, and I know that some days I enjoy the passage and some days I don't. Oh, I don't know which passage it was. 2.5 weeks, I think I read 9 books, which is pretty neat, 'cause you never get a chance in life to read a lot of books.
Jo often spends time on the bow alone. It's her special place. Up here, the incessant noise of the boat underway seems to be all behind you. It's strangely calm, but for the rise and fall of the large ocean swell. Jo breathes in the deep peace and the profound sense of isolation that being alone on a vast sea in a small boat can convey. It's here on the bow that so often, far from land, dolphins will join Sojourn. It's a sight that never fails to lift your spirits, and you're left to marvel at their fluid grace and beauty as they weave and dive across the bow. And then, for no apparent reason, as quickly as they came, they're gone. Sojourn is rapidly approaching the halfway mark between Noumea and North Cape. They're halfway home on their final passage, and they celebrate this important waypoint. Jo, strapped to the galley, bakes and decorates a cake. They're now counting off the miles to their home and take time to enjoy this moment. Ross and Jo are alone at sea, but somewhere out there unseen are others just like them. Some are short-handed sailors, others are boats with larger crews, all making their way home from the Pacific before the hurricane season arrives. Sojourn is part of a small fleet that Ross has organised on the dock in Noumea to keep a daily radio schedule as they sail back to New Zealand.
Hey, Ross, it's Corey. I'm very happy to relay for you. Here.
I was listening to you, Corey. Thanks very much for... I just love the passages, and I love the activity, and I love all the things that go on. And although people may say, what on earth do you do at sea, I just don't have enough time in the day, so that's why I stay awake. We're on a heading of 125 true. We're sailing in about 12 knots from the west, heading out east of the...
Because they're spread across several hundred miles of ocean, they're able to observe and share the weather at their positions with the rest of the group.
A little bit of trouble, but looking forward to catching up in Opua. Over.
With the barometer reading 1,013 and slowly falling. Over. Okay, that's all the copy.
Sojourn is now motor sailing, which enables her to sail closer to the wind and take a more direct route to the top of New Zealand. She's carried extra fuel for this very reason. Ross refuels at sea from the jerry cans lashed on deck and stowed below. Without the extra fuel, they'd be many more days at sea and would need to sail a much greater distance. It's a strategy that reflects Ross's experience and his attention to detail. Alone, on the open sea, you need to be prepared for any eventuality. He has enough fuel to maintain a good speed and still have enough in reserve for when he arrives on the coast. The previous evening, while on watch, Ross had heard something metallic fall on the deck. By chance, an inspection at the base of the mast on the pitching deck reveals a small shackle pin. Ross recognises it as a pin from one of the batten cars high on the mainsail. the norwesterly wind is increasing. In heavy weather, the batten would repeatedly impact into the sail track of the mast and destroy the track. Ross needs Joe's help to turn Sojourn up into the wind so he can safely drop the mainsail and make good the repair.
Okay, Joe, can you now slow it down and go head to wind again? When push comes to shove and I say, Joe, I need this now, I know that she'll do it. She'll do exactly as I say, with no question, and she'll do it really well. And to know that as the skipper is a fantastic thing and great support.
They need to move quickly. The wind is rising as the storm approaches. The advent of weather routing has made a huge difference to the lives of cruising sailors. Previously, yachts would set sail in a favourable weather pattern, but have little knowledge of the weather that would actually lie ahead. A weather router has the ability to predict wind strength and direction for the entire passage. Before and during a passage, Ross is in daily contact via satellite phone with their weather router, Dr. Roger Badham. Roger, affectionately known as Clouds, is the chief meteorologist for Emirates Team New Zealand and is a personal friend of Ross and Joe's. Ever since Valencia, across both the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans, Clouds has provided expert weather routing advice on all Sojourn's passages. The wind, as expected, has been slowly rising throughout the morning. Ross decides it's time to reef the mainsail. It needs to be done quickly as a storm front is nearly upon them. Clouds has predicted gusts of 25 to 35 knots by 10 a.m. this morning. Reefing the mainsail will reduce its size and surface area and help prevent Sojourn from being overpowered or knocked down in the strong winds. Reefing helps maintain the balance of the yacht to sail better for the conditions. In heavy conditions, Ross and Joe haul in their headsail. It's hard physical work.
I don't want to be doing the sort of sailing that we're doing now, shorthanded, when I'm an awful lot older than I am now, because you just realise that you're getting less mobile, that you're not as strong as you were, and that adds up to being less able to handle a crisis at sea. I still feel young, but the reality is that there are things that you're less capable of doing as you get older.
Ross was a sailmaker by trade, and in these conditions his preference is for a staysail, a small, elegant but simple sail. Ross has added extra rigging to support the staysail. This extra rigging will stop the mast pumping backwards and forwards in heavy seas. As the wind continues to build, it's time to put a second reef into the mainsail. 2 reefs in the main and a staysail is a very good rig for the 25 to 35 knots of wind that are being predicted. Ross has been advised by Clouds that there's a brief opportunity by which time Sojourn must be inside the lee of the North Cape, or she'll battle with 18 hours of a fierce southerly storm. Ross has been given 45 hours to reach the new waypoint. Ross calculates the time to reach the waypoint given the expected conditions. It'll be close. There are only 4 hours to spare before the weather window will close. If Sojourn heads too far east, the strong wind will take longer to reach her, but be worse, because she'll be spending more time in exposed waters and rougher seas. It will then be harder to head back into the wind to gain the lee of the land. If she goes west and heads towards the strong wind, she'll meet the strong wind sooner, but will be able to turn and run towards the shelter of North Cape, with the wind from a more favourable and comfortable angle. The third option is to slow the boat and let the blow go through. Ross feels he's too close to home to make that call, but for the boat spread out behind them and short of fuel, it'll be their best choice. He decides to trust the accuracy of Cloud's predictions, as he's done so many times before. As predicted by Clouds, the southerly blow has now struck. It is sunshine and daylight, but with gusts of between 30 to 40 knots, and the wind continues to rise. By night, this would have been much worse, but Sojourn is able to make good speed as she claws her way to windward, with the motor being used to enable her to point higher and take a more direct route. This is where the wisdom of carrying that extra fuel pays off. High winds and a building sea are not the only challenges in the rough waters of New Zealand's North Cape. As well as bad weather, the vicinity of North Cape can be difficult and dangerous because of the high number of shipping movements. Last night, 2 large cargo ships were detected on Sojourn's navigation system. They travel at great speed. One passed just astern of Sojourn, while the other crossed less than a mile ahead.
I can be scared at times for a while, and then luckily it's like childbirth, I forget it entirely. I don't pretend it didn't happen, but I don't dwell on it.
It's been a day of tough sailing, hard on the wind. This will be their last night at sea as Sojourn closes on New Zealand. The northern coast of New Zealand is rugged and dangerous and has claimed many boats and lives in the past. But sometimes it can be safer to stay at sea and wait for dawn rather than approaching the land by night, however disappointing that may be for a sailor just wanting to get home. However, Ross knows this coast well, and he's made this run before. He reflects on how much more pleasant it could have been in daylight and sunshine. But they're nearly home. By midnight, the wind has dropped out and is a steady 10 knots with an easy sea state, and Sojourn slides on through the night, eager to reach Opua. They are now on the second to last leg of their long voyage from Valencia. The next waypoint will be at the 9 Pin and the entrance to the Bay of Islands. Once under the shelter of the cliffs, just before the bay, Ross drops the staysail. It signifies the end of the heavy weather. He's glad it's done its job and is now down. They're almost home, and just before sunrise, they call their children.
Hello, Emma speaking.
Yeah, how are you, mate? How are you? Just to say that Sojourn's home.
Oh my God, you made it. Oh, you must both be so happy.
Yeah, no, it's great. I'm really, really happy about it. What's happening?
That's awesome. Your mama is so brave. I'm so proud of you guys. What a great team.
And as expected, the last 18 hours was the toughest by a mile.
Hey, thank you. I know, halfway around the world. Yeah, I know, it's pretty amazing. No, I know, pretty exciting. Good, we're going to have a glass of champagne soon, even though it's I haven't had breakfast, we'll have a glass of champagne and then chuck it to the dock and then make a plan.
I didn't ask for as much as maybe I ought to, but I'm staying in touch with the one I love.
I've deliberately tried to avoid thinking about what'll happen when we get home. Not because I'm unrealistic, but because I've always worried about the fact that if I think too much or worry too much about what life may be after we get home, then I won't enjoy the now. And this cruise for us is such a special thing that the last thing I want to do is affect it or influence it by thinking a lot about what we're going to do when we get home.
I've been with you. These are the big
Probably some of the greater joys have been arriving in a place after you've been, sailing towards it. Because sometimes you're there and you're days and days and you think you're never going to get anywhere, so you just sort of switch off and it becomes a bit of a blur in the middle sometimes on a passage. But that's a pretty exciting thing when you arrive there.
And you don't do many passages in your life. So to cross the Atlantic or to cross the large part of the Pacific is a really special thing. I hope it's not once in a lifetime, but it may be. So the excitement of arrival is tinged with the sadness of the thought that actually this passage is coming to an end.
I do love change and adventure still, and I still will keep doing it, and hopefully we will keep having adventures and changes in our lives.
Sojourn has carried them safely home. 4 years and 22,348 miles later, they're back where they started from.
Hey Ross, what are you going to do with the rest of our lives?
Beyond my wildest dreams, beyond my wildest dreams, beyond my wildest dreams, I've been with you. I've been with you.